Welcome to Season 4 of Foster Motley's podcast about life and wealth. We are happy to be back, and we're so pleased you're with us. Any important long trip is easier to navigate when you have milestones to guide you along the way. Your life journey to retirement is no different. Milestones for wealth management goals at every stage of life can give you purpose and keep you on track to meet your life goals. Well, Foster Motley's Rachel Rasmussen and Megan Lyons are with me, Patrice Sikora, talking about wealth management milestones. Rachel and Megan, welcome.
Thank you, Patrice. It's so good to be back with you. We're excited to start a new season here.
We are all excited, yes. Well, Rachel, the word milestone, I've been using that. It sounds kind of intimidating, but does it have to be?
Oh, that it does. That it does. Today, we're here to talk about to-dos, not to-dos. So we're going to kind of flip this idea on its head. I'm borrowing a term from Gretchen Rubin, of course, who's a podcaster and an author. I really think she's awesome. But she says, rather than always thinking about all the things that you have to do along the way, every now and again, it's nice to touch on the things that you've accomplished. And so today we want to talk a little bit more about what that might look like, how you might mark some really good wins in your financial life, that kind of thing. So, kind of turning the to dos on its head. And let's see what we can ta-da in your wealth life.
I love it. I love that. Well,
I-
ta-da away, my dear.
Yeah, so if I'll just start with a funny story. So Megan and I, oh, it's funny to me and Megan maybe, we did the Flying Pig marathon relay together with
Right.
two other folks from Foster and Motley. And along the way, I tell you what, those miles markers were so critical to giving you that little that little boost that you said, man, another one bites the dust. This feels so good. But it also says, wow, I've got some more to do, right? So, what we're thinking about today is what are the things that we can mark in a financial situation for you as you go through life that you might notice that could give you that energy, that boost, that confidence to take that next step? And it's not necessarily when can I retire? That's the eternal question for a lot of people we work with. No, not everyone these days. But I think as we go decade by decade through our lives, there are little things that we should notice and remark upon and talk about as we meet with clients. And Megan and I do that all the time in meetings.
Megan, jump in here anytime you want to. I mean, Rachel can just go and go and go.
It's only because she
Plus,
knows so much. It's because she's so good.
she does. She does.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about this?
Yeah, we're talking about this, Patrice, because I think as Rachel alluded to, it's really easy to get bogged down in strictly numbers. And I think when we hear milestones outside of, this conversation right here, you might hear some rules of thumb. You might hear you should have 1 times your salary saved by 30, 2 by 40, 5 by 50. And these numbers can start to feel unwieldy. They can start to feel too far out of reach, depending on where you are in your own personal journey. So we like to drill these milestones down a little bit more per person, personalize them for the client at hand. And we think everyone should be doing that, whether they're our client or not, to try and find little milestones, little markers along the way that are helping them see where they've come from, where they're going, what they've achieved along the way, and give themselves a little pat on the back. Because if you're not doing that, then you're probably going to lose some motivation and a little bit of steam to keep going. So we like to think about milestones less in the specific numbers and more about where are you in your season of life? What is important to you right now? And what are you working towards in that journey? And how can we celebrate with you when you've made a marker and you've made some progress?
Megan brings up such a good point here. I just want to hone in on that a little bit, in terms of creating the forum to have the discussion. I've talked about that on prior podcasts. Sometimes you just don't make space to discuss it, but working with an advisor, you set the meeting, you're creating your accountability partner, you're kind of figuring it out together, and we're taking notes. So coming back to that over the years can be super informative and hopefully very motivating.
The documenting, that's a great thought. Megan, talk to me about documenting your milestones.
Yeah, I'll say specifically as a financial planner, I feel like my entire job is documentation. So it starts with documentation of goals, and anyone can do this. What are your goals, and where do you think is an appropriate emergency fund to have? What is the next step? When would you like to start saving, or how much would you like to start saving in X account? Once we document, then as we progress, we're constantly casting back to look at, hey, your net worth 5 years ago was X. Now it's here. Did you understand what those tiny habits that you put in place, like what they have grown to, how they have really made progress on this obscure goal that we set for you at our initial meeting? It's a constant cast back and forth, and it is always a joy, honestly, to sit across from a client and say, I know it might feel like you're still not where you want to be. That's okay. But let me remind you, you had a negative net worth when I first met you, and you now have $500,000 or $1 million, and their eyes can just, widen, and they just look so delighted, and they look really proud, and they should be, because they put a lot of time in to get to this space. And it's our moment to say, look what you've done.
Megan, do you find that some people, well, forget what's been documented and you pull it out and they say, "Oh, really? Did I say that?"
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we all have select memories at times, both for the good and unfortunately for the bad. And one of our jobs is to sit and provide, a history, of course, both accountability, of course, in any of your financial decisions. But in the case of milestones, sometimes I think we're able to counter a couple of very specific behavioral finance issues like herd mentality. So, for example, we have clients who are really growing in wealth quickly. Let's say that they are high earners and they're really progressing fast. And we're asking them or encouraging them to maybe tamp down the lifestyle, or not tamp down, but just be thoughtful about what they're doing. And something that we can do is provide some really clear documentation, both in the numbers of what's happening in their portfolio or what's happening in their net worth, et cetera. But we can also just have that conversation with them that reminds them of why they've made the choice to have such a methodical plan and why they're setting these goals and milestones. So sometimes we're able to really counter some of our, unfortunately, worst habits as humans, which is to go along, get along, make decisions quickly, keep up with the Joneses, things like this. And celebrating milestones and showing them why their decisions and why their hard work has put them where they are helps them then make a wiser decision again in the future to continue on this train and keep progressing with their journey.
Positive reinforcement.
Exactly.
All right. Right. We've talked about documentation, about behavior, about celebrating the goals, setting the goals. Let's talk about the stages of life because the goals for your 20s are not going to be the goals for your 50s, 60s, 70s and on. So let's start at the young end, okay? The 20s. Talk to me about the
Oh, the
20s.
20s. If I knew what I know now, I might have done things differently. No, but in all seriousness, the 20s are about setting habits. So if we can talk to somebody in their 20s about setting good habits, the power of compounding will have such a greater impact. So in your 20s, you might be thinking about that first job, and you might be getting your first look at what an employee benefits package looks like. So, a milestone we could celebrate here is wow, your first dollar into a 401k plan. Look at you go. You're saving for future you down the line and kind of foregoing some current wishes. So, we look at that as a milestone. Maybe you're facing some student loans, so getting a plan to pay down that debt, I think, would be a very nice milestone and habit to build. And the 20s is a space to learn lessons on a small scale. So before you've kind of gone really far down the line and it's too late to adjust. So making lessons kind of turn into good habits. And then, as Megan says, keeping your lifestyle in check. So as you go along, maybe you get a little raise. So rather than taking all that to the bank and doing something with it, maybe you save a little bit more, increase your savings rate. And also establishing emergency savings. So 3 to 6 months, just getting it stocked away for when the car breaks down or something big is happening. So we look at the 20s as your kind of early years to figure out yourself, figure out what money means to you, figure out what your value systems are, and really start the compounding of the investment returns by getting some dollars into some investment accounts if
What
you can.
about debt? What about debt in your 20s?
And then snowballing it down, looking at what is the highest interest, the biggest cost to you. That is a guaranteed rate of return if you can pay off some debt. So having a plan in place to pay above the typical payment, you look and say, how can I tackle this sooner? How can I really cut that down sooner? It's going to be by applying extra principal payments along the way. And that's a habit that you can do every single month. I'm going to stock away an extra $100 into this, whatever that debt looks like, and you'll be surprised how quickly it would roll off.
I would also say it's the time where you learn really responsible use of it as well, and on like a go forward basis. So, what does it look like to use a credit card, pay it off in full, and know that you can do that consistently? It sets you off, obviously, in a really good place for when you want to purchase a home or a car or any other of the larger purchases that rely on a good credit score and good habits.
Do you find that folks in their 20s are more likely to get into troublesome debt? Can they learn early enough to get out of it, or does that come later on?
That's a good question. I would
That's
say
a very good
it's
question.
dependent on personality, as with most things. I do think it is a time where many people do accrue the debt. Maybe your salary isn't particularly large, and maybe you're out of step with maybe your friends and how they're spending, or maybe you just haven't learned the habits yet and you haven't been whammied with it yet to learn that you need to pull back. So I do think there are quite a few people we'll run into who are carrying some debt. Usually it's not catastrophic. And the good thing about credit card debt is, though the interest rates are unfortunately very high, balances for most people are not wild. You're not looking at paying off $200,000 of credit card debt. It's, a couple thousand. So there's always the time to turn the ship and turn the tide.
Also, young people kind of get out of their parents' house and they say, "Oh, this is my life." Well, sometimes they're in for a rude awakening. Their means is not the same as maybe what they came from, or maybe it's better. I mean, but it's going to be different. So I think it's figuring out what your new normal is and trying to maintain a balanced budget. Those are little milestones along the way. I think in your early years, it's more about establishing the behaviors than really any significant dollars.
All right, let's move into the 30s because this is where I would expect a lot of people get married.
Exactly. I'm in the thick of my 30s right now, so, living it as well as kind of seeing it with clients. Big milestones obviously are going to be marriage. It's going to be combining finances with somebody, whether you choose to keep it separate or together, your choice, but you got to know how to do it well. You might have a child, buy a house. There's a couple big things that are all happening at once. In some ways, I would say the 30s can often feel like a bit of a pressure cooker for everyone. You might be pulled in so many directions at once. And while your salary has grown, you're 10 plus years, 15 years into your career, perhaps you're not in your full earning potential yet. Your dollars are having to go a lot of directions and are having to work really hard for you. And I think this is a phase where it's really important to start providing that positive affirmation to our clients, and we hope they do for themselves, which is to say, you are being asked to do a lot with your dollars right now. So let's start to track things like net worth. It's positive. Okay, now it's 100K. Now it's 250, 500. Watching those dollars while you're also taking care of some of your basic but very important core expenses like a mortgage and daycare and college savings. It feels like the encouragement piece is really needed, and we really like to celebrate with clients when they're making all of these wise decisions at once and having to do a lot with what doesn't always feel like a lot.
And that's the time when you start seeing different kinds of accounts come into play. So you might experience your first saving into a brokerage account that's not related to your employer plan. So you've started your employer savings, that account's starting to grow. Maybe you're looking at a Roth or even just a standard individual or joint brokerage account if you have a partner, and getting some after tax investments going. I think that's when we normally see that starting to accumulate and grow the net worth. So we want to mark the first time you open one of those brokerage accounts, it's because you have some money that you can stock away for something else that's important in your life.
So this is part of the accumulation phase?
Oh, we're getting there.
Okay.
But I do think, most workers, according to labor and statistics, they earn the most between 45 and 54 is kind of peak earning years, but you start seeing some big jumps in your mid 30s and going into your early 40s when you really have some expertise to offer, and if you're working outside the home, you're starting to see some pay raises. So now it's time to figure out what to do with that, and that's when you ask Megan, the financial planner, what to do with that.
Megan, what do you do with that?
Well, I mean, you have a lot of options. We hope that you're making a max out of your retirement plan if you have access to one. That's a huge accomplishment for a lot of people. And so I always like to celebrate when somebody's making that choice. You also want to make sure that your emergency fund is not just topped up in the way that it might have been in your 20s and your 30s, but you probably own a lot more in assets. You probably have a lot more responsibilities. So we want to make sure we're keeping that in process. It's also the time to just make sure things like if it wasn't already done, which we would have loved to have done in your 30s, we'd love to make sure your estate planning is done, as sad as it sometimes feels to be planning for that time when you're no longer here. And we're also going to be making sure that you have your appropriate insurance in place because for a lot of people in their 40s, it's not. It's for some people they're on their own, and that is perfectly wonderful. But a lot of people in their 40s are married or have kids or both, and you need to make sure they're taken care of should you hit an issue with disability or an issue where life insurance comes into play. So the 40s are a lot about responsibility. And I know I already said this in your 30s, but in your 40s, it's a bit of a slog, I think. Really, anything from 40s up until retirement, because you have reached probably some of the highest earnings you're going to have, and they might still go up, but most people aren't seeing the giant upward trajectory that they were used to seeing earlier in their career. And it's all about maintaining the balance of, am I enjoying life now? Am I feeling like I am pouring into the life that I want to live currently? But I'm not missing out on taking care of future me, my family in the future, etc. And it's definitely a bit of a teeter-totter, I think, in this phase that is runs almost 20 years generally until people start to really near retirement.
Hey, I'm in that phase and I'm saying this is going to be my best time yet. I'm convinced of it. But there's a few little small things along the way besides just you're accumulating, maybe you're paying for that education you saved for all this time. You're actually seeing the benefits on the flip side. You're seeing your kid go off to college perhaps, and you're helping with that, and that feels really good. And so seeing that joy, or also watching dependents launch. We love that. Launch away and become your own selves. Maybe you're starting to look at that. And then in a small way, maybe you go to buy something and for the first time, you're not looking at the price tag. I love that moment.
Whoa.
I remember that moment. It was something as small as like a shirt at Target, but I was like, I just bought it. I don't even know what that costs. What's my receipt? Maybe you never get that way, but for me, that was important. So thinking about what during this time might make you feel like you've made a ta-da or a milestone, and marking that down and writing it down and say, when I get here, I'm going to do a little thing to celebrate. Buy myself a latte at Starbucks, for example.
I could think you could do more for a milestone
It
than a
depends
lot.
on how large. We don't want to the treat yourself culture has gotten a little crazy. All within the means, right, Megan?
All within your means. It's all within proportion. You want to buy a boat, that's great, but we'll have to make sure that's proportional to everything else that's going on in life.
Well, Megan, in your experience, which decade do you believe is the most difficult for people to stick to their goals? I mean, in the beginning in the 20s, I can see them saying, yes, 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 nose to the grindstone, I'm going to do this. 30s, family, house, you really don't have much time to think about anything but I've got to meet my goals. The 40s, as you say, Rachel, maybe you're not looking at the price tags. Maybe you're starting to slide off a little bit and not following the milestones.
Yeah, it's hard to say an exact age. I would say it's maybe more of a season of life. So it could be for some people late 30s, it could be into your 40s, into your 50s. It's kind of that moment where the urgency doesn't necessarily feel as urgent. AKA you might be maxing out your retirement. You are putting some amount of money into the taxable account, but maybe you're not paying as much attention to your lifestyle creep. And where that can kind of get you later is if we check in periodically, but all of a sudden we do a good true up sometime in your mid 50s and we say, "You've done an excellent job at saving. We're really proud of you." But proportionally, as we look at your lifestyle, it still looks like it's going to be a little tighter than you might want it to be. Is that okay? So I think there's a moment in time, again, it's variable for people, but a season where you just have to remind them, we want you to enjoy now. We never want somebody to burn themselves out in the pursuit of, financial independence or financial stability, but we do want people to keep that eye out to what you're spending now is going to be a lot harder to pull yourself back from when you're retired and the paycheck stops. And that is a gut-wrenching moment for a lot of people. So I always just like to keep them aware that we love that you're enjoying life, and if you have the means to take 3 trips this year overseas, then I want you to do it. But let's always keep that eye on, do you think you'll take 3 trips when you're retired? Let's make sure the portfolio supports that as well.
Ah, that's so smart. I mean, to me, it's kind of you're at mile marker 20, 21, and you know you've got this. Things are going all right. You're going to finish this race. But we want to know, keep our eye on the prize, and you want to, perhaps you want to retire. Are you doing everything you can to get that goal met? Do you have a little bit more to go? Or perhaps you say, wow, my pace is going really well. I'm going to consider buying a second property so that I might begin to enjoy a little bit more when I start scaling down work in my 60s. So, those are things where you kind of get a better sense of what that next chapter might look like for you. And then we try to help you figure out what that it might cost and how we might plan for that because there's still some time left to make some good savings happen.
All right, talk about that time left just before retirement.
Yeah, that's a really interesting time. I think that's when the urgency gets turned back up again. You've kind of like now you're at mile marker. I don't know. I have actually done 2 marathons. So I'm going to say this is about where I've reached mile 24. So you know you're really close. But man, those last 2 miles are going to take it out of you. People usually in their mid 50s are starting to really see the clock. They're starting to say, oh, there's going to be a time where I'm no longer working. I wonder if it's in 5 years or is it in 10 years or is it in 2 years? I'm not sure. In that season, we really like to encourage people to take a really introspective moment to say, what do you want out of retirement? It's not just about numbers. Do you have something you're retiring to? Or do you have some goals that you want to accomplish during retirement? Other than one day you'll not go to work, you'll wake up and you'll say, well, what now? So once people have, hopefully taken that step, and we can assist in that to some degree, though it does require some effort on behalf of the client, on their own. We have to start coaching them on what it might feel like to draw down the portfolio. It's a conversation because I think nothing can prepare a client until they start to see that the balances don't go up the way they used to go up. Hopefully, they don't go down too
Mhm.
much, but they're not creeping up anymore. And we want to really be talking with them in a very proactive way to say, this is going to happen. It might feel weird, but let's treat this like a paycheck. Maybe we start a monthly distribution. So you used to get paid on the first of the month. Let's help you get paid on the first of the month. It'll just come out of your portfolio. So I would say that this season is very much based around the emotional preparation, let's say, for retirement. And then technically, there's a couple items around long-term care planning that unfortunately we do want to discuss and make sure you're ready for. Health insurance planning for a moment when you're maybe not on an employer plan. And those maybe don't feel like milestones, but they are, because if you haven't had those conversations, it's going to make that leap into retirement that much harder.
Rachel, your turn.
Oh man, once you kind of get into retirement mode, it it can be more challenging because it's not just the financial aspect of it. It's how do you plan your new life? What that might be, what you do with your day. And that might be a milestone in itself. It's wow, I found this next chapter. I want to learn a language and because I have more time or something like that. But kind of bringing it back to the finances when you're hitting retirement, you're starting to get comfortable with a new normal, which is kind of we've saved, we've done everything and we're here and now what? And that's when we really start getting into the legacy planning. And that's when you know that I am financially independent, I have met my needs. And now I might think about doing some other things. And I have to tell you, this is my favorite part of the journey because it's all about joy. It's about joy when you think about helping family members. You want to help a grandchild with a wedding. Wow, you never got that help because maybe you didn't come from that, but you're going to do that for them, and it feels really good to share the fruits of your labor and all of the sacrifices you've made along the way. So that is just a super exciting part of a client's journey that I really get a lot of enjoyment from.
I'll add to that and say, along those same lines, in the legacy planning category, I really enjoy talking to people about their charitable intent. We have, I feel like, very charitable clients all across the age spectrum. So it's not limited to people who are in retirement. Um, but I do think there's something when you can tell somebody, "Hey, you're financially independent. We are struggling to model scenarios where you will not have, money to last through your life." And all of a sudden, the world opens up to them, and I like to see it's just a joy to see the generosity with which they then start to approach giving to their favorite organizations or people, family, of course. But that that coupled with the extras that they can now dole out to friends, family, trips, maybe something that just makes their life a little bit smoother that they've been holding off on. It has never made me laugh harder than, me talking to a client and them saying, "I've never owned a new car. I am 67 years old and I've never owned my own new car. I've always purchased used." And to say, please, if that would give you joy, and it doesn't for some people, but if it does, go buy that new car. That's going to make life easier than fixing the beater that you've been driving for 20 years now. So it's nice to give people that permission to just go take care of that.
But you're also getting into the point now here, you're talking legacy
Yes,
and doing things for yourself. Let's talk about, you mentioned it earlier, estate planning and a will.
it's true.
How many people don't have a will, a simple document?
Well, we hope of our clients, not many. But,
Yeah.
many, unfortunately. There are a very scary statistic out there that up to 43% of Americans, don't have a will, and it would take a health issue or a really serious health issue for them to create one, which is kind of jarring when you think about it. It is not maybe a fun thing to undertake. It is just a tedious thing at times, but it is gonna create such peace of mind for your family, and yeah, it's something where as you reach the end of life, I do think that the estate plan gains a little bit more nuance. I can tell you that I have estate planning documents and they are mostly predicated on how to take care of my children. It's going to look a little different in another 20, 30 years where I have a lot more to dispense, into people's hands asset wise. But also, I'm probably going to have some more thoughts around how my life went and how I want to be remembered. And I think it just really gives a gift to your family to make sure that those are in place. They are easily found, they're easily understandable, and that you've provided in the way that you can for them.
I love that, Megan. I think reframing the death and taxes discussion and making it not about that, making it about giving a gift to your family. Because when you think about your passing, no one wants to think about their demise, but you want to consider who you're leaving behind and what legacy you want for them, and you don't want to create a hardship. So what a gift it is to say, Here's my wishes. Here's what I would love." Even maybe in even accompanying the will with a letter to my family. So we have a template for that. I think we might have done a podcast on that subject. but thinking about the ways that you can inform your family members or friends about what you might like, and considering what stepped up care might look like. Being in a place of decision making is empowerment. And that is a mile marker of I've made a choice for myself rather than a choice being made for me. I think that's really, really powerful.
And I just wanted to add that as we have talked through these, we've talked very linearly, milestones, they feel linear for obvious reasons. But as we discuss things like estate planning, long-term care, final estate taxes, whatever it is that happens kind of at the end of life, there's no way to escape that it ties directly back to also some decisions that are made earlier in the journey. And as much as we want to present this as a timeline that you're just walking your way through it, it is a little bit of a networked approach. And again, that's where working with somebody is, of course, one of the best ways that you can make sure that you're hitting all the right times and they're all networking together well. But even for anyone listening who maybe doesn't currently have an advisor, doesn't want one, doesn't need one right now, keeping that in your head that our lives are linear and yet also all kind of ties together in one big knot, and always be casting forward and backwards, and when you're hitting that kind of milestone, give yourself some accolades for the good decision you might have made 10, 15 years before.
Megan, that is just spot on. Your habits early in life help you later in life. It kind of all ties back. I won't bore you with a circle of life discussion, but I will pull a quote from one of my favorite authors, James Clear, who writes Atomic Habits. And he writes, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So you make a mistake, it's okay. Keep voting for yourself, keep choosing the next way forward, and keep building those habits along the way. And we're here to celebrate those milestones with you. So that's the fun part.
Well, how can people reach you? Because I'm sure they're going to want to have to, or they're going to have some questions, and maybe they need some help with milestones.
Well, you can reach us, Patrice, at fosterandmotley.com, or you can give us a call at 513-561-6640.
All right, folks, set your wealth management milestones and celebrate the results along the way. Follow this podcast to make sure you know when the next episode is ready for you, and please share with others. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Patrice.